Good morning. I'm just going to go ahead and confess, I am tired. It has been a long 8 hours. Just to let you know, on behalf of our family, thank you for all those who have sent cards, who have called, who have sent Facebook messages, who have emailed, sent gifts one way or the other. As you can probably tell this morning, the newborn, Ren Mercy, is A-OK. And loves to stay up at night. I don't know if you knew that or not. Newborns love to stay up at night. But seriously, thank you so much for your support and your love that you've shown to our family. Also, one other announcement. We got an update from Manny Paganapalli, who is the director of the preacher training school that this congregation supports in India. In 2017, they have baptized over 2,300 people, and with the 47 students that are connected with that congregation, with that preaching school, there have been 48 churches planted in India. So just know that your support goes to that mission and that work is thriving. So good on us for helping support the gospel in India. If you have your Bibles, turn over to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. That's where we're going to be this morning. And here's something that takes place just about every single year, every 4 years, and even sometimes when you're watching TV, you see people react this way. Now, you don't have to put your hands up, but some of us in the room watch the show Cops. You know, bad boys, all that, yeah. Not that I watch the show, or have ever watched the show. No, I have. And what's so interesting about that show is that you have people who are absolutely, positively caught red-handed doing a crime. And what's so funny, or maybe even ironic about that, is that when the cop goes to put the cuffs on the criminal says, "I have rights." And then the cop says, "You absolutely do. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you can, or anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. If you do not have a lawyer, one will be provided." And here's the thing. If the cop doesn't say that, the criminal gets off because he or she has rights. And isn't it interesting that just these people, and maybe it's just the deal with being an American, we are obsessed with our rights. You can't do that to me. I have rights. Or I can do this because I have rights. And what that leads to, what that can lead to, what it does lead to oftentimes, is conflict on the basis not just of rights, but of differences. And here's the thing about differences. We all have them. I mean, just for a split second, just survey the room around you real quick, and you'll notice, and because of the relationships you have, or maybe just by appearance, you understand that there's something different about you and your background that's different from everybody else in the room. Now, what's so amazing about the church and what's so amazing about the gospel is this, is that Jesus pulled together 12 people from different backgrounds, from different socioeconomic standings, from different trades, from different jobs, from different families, and yeah, on the basis of maybe where they grew up, or on the basis of what religious sect they ascribed to, they themselves had different rights. See, the zealot in the first century believed that he had the right to go out and kill Romans for the sake of restoring the Jewish kingdom. The common fisherman didn't believe that. And so what you see with Jesus and the 12, and what you see in the church at Corinth, sometimes, definitely in the church at Corinth, but also with Jesus' disciples, is that sometimes there's this clash of what they believed that they had the right to do. Remember the two disciples that walked up to Jesus and they surveyed the people and they wished that God would call thunder down on those people. They believed they had the right to proclaim that. And when you look at the books of 1st and 2nd Corinthians, you are dealing with a church and you are surveying a church that is, how can I say this in the modern millennial vernacular? They're jacked up. How's that? They are messed up. They are tore up from the floor up, so to speak. And even in the first chapter, Paul in his letters often gives, a sentence or two to the great job that a certain group of people are doing. Know what he does in 1 Corinthians chapter 1? He doesn't open up with that big, hey, you're doing a great job here. He says, hey, you guys are dividing on the basis of differences. Now, as we move into 2018, as we focus in on the family, we're going to get started a little bit early. Because what we see in the book of 1 Corinthians, as I said before, is a congregation that's focused not on what they have in common, but they are obsessed over the differences that exist among that group of people. In chapter 1, it's about, well, who baptized you? And whoever baptized you kind of puts you in a hierarchy of standing, gives you a certain status or position. Well, if you were baptized by Peter, man, you are the man or you are the woman. Well, if you were baptized by Apollos, hey, let's not shortchange Apollos here. Hey, let's not shortchange Paul. And Paul says, that's foolishness. And so, what we need to look at in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, the conversation that's taking place here, is often what can take place when people, God's people, focus more on the differences rather than what we have in common. And what Paul's going to lay out for us in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 is ultimately this one point, is that differences don't equal division. That differences don't equal division. And so the conversation that's taking place in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and chapter 9 is this conversation over idols and meat sacrifice to idols. Now, that is something that none of us, I don't think, deal with today. None of us goes around and says, man, I'm going to go down to the market, I'm going to go down to the food line, I'm going to buy me some meat that was sacrificed to a graven image. I hope you don't do that. And so what you have is this congregation of Jews and Gentiles, and one side, the Jews would say, it is absolutely, positively wrong, spiritually wrong, to eat meat that's sacrificed to idols. And the Gentiles would say, well, actually, idols are nothing, therefore, we can eat the meat that's sacrificed to idols. And so, as Paul addresses this issue, there's a series of questions that Paul is answering in the book of 1 Corinthians. And so he answers that question in Acts chapter 8 and basically says, idols aren't anything. You can have meat that's sacrificed to idols, but make sure you don't do such a thing that will cause your Jewish brother to stumble. Don't use the difference to divide and cause somebody to stumble. And so what takes place after that in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 is that Paul starts to address some things about himself. See, here's what happens when you stand for truth. This is what happens when you stand where the gospel allows you to stand. Is that there are going to be people that will come after you. I hope that you understand this, that as you individually and as us collectively seek to move and walk the path and walk in the steps that Jesus stepped, that there will be people, there will be entities in the world that will seek to stifle our progress. Because here's the thing about the world. Here's the thing about society. Society views the gospel as a threat. And also, when people in God's church here in Corinth believe that they have the right, or that they're going to focus on the differences, you know who they end up attacking? They end up attacking the very person that was sent to them to preach the gospel so that they might be saved. And so Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, watch this, am I not free? So in chapter 9, verses 1 through 7, Paul is going to lay out the charges that have been made against him and also Barnabas on the basis of differences that are not binding. So you had people in Corinth that wanted to bind some stuff on Paul that the Lord himself never required of Paul. And notice what it is. Am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus our Lord? Am I not, or are you not my workmanship in the Lord? Paul's basically saying, hey, you guys know me, you know my story, and actually, this congregation in Corinth probably wouldn't exist, and this congregation in Corinth wouldn't be where it is if it weren't for me. Because I've been sent to spread the gospel, and you guys obeyed the gospel on the basis of my teaching. If to others I am not an apostle, at least I am to you. For you are the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. People know who I am because of what has taken place here initially, when this congregation was planted. And so he says in verse 3, this is my defense to those who would, check this out, examine me. This is my defense for all of the people that are asking these questions, for all these people that are seeking, to divide my relationship with you all. Now, mark these words as we go through them. There are a couple of key words that we're going to look at and hone in on. The first key word is right. Remember rights? I have my rights. You have your rights. Well, Paul says, I've got rights too. And he says, do we not have the right to eat or drink? Do we not have the right to take along a believing wife, as do other apostles and the brothers of the Lord? And see what people were saying is this, is that Paul, you're going to work here in Corinth, guess what? You can't have a wife. And Paul says, really? Am I the only one that is supposed to follow that path? I mean, what about all of the other apostles? And what about the Lord's brother and Peter? Or is it only Barnabas and I who have no right to refrain from working for a living? Who serves a soldier at his own expense? Who plants a vineyard without eating of its fruit? Or who tends a flock without getting some of the milk? And so some of the people are saying, Paul, you shouldn't be able to preach the gospel and also receive money for preaching the gospel. And Paul says, well, where did you get that from? Who did you hear that from? And notice what he says in verse 8. Do I say these things on human authority? Does the law not say the same? For it's written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle an ox when it treads out the grain. It is for oxen that God, is it for the oxen that God's concerned? Does he not certainly speak for our sake? It was written for our sake because the plowman should plow in hope that the thresher thresh in hope of sharing in the crop. If we have sown spiritual things among you, is it too much that we reap material things from you? If others share in this rightful claim on you, do we not even more? And so what Paul is saying is, you guys, there's some people here in Corinth that are laying all these charges against me, and here's the thing, I have the right to do all this stuff. I have the right to take a believing wife. I have the right to require material things because I've sown spiritual things among you. Now notice what Paul does here. See, here's the tendency of people in general. That when people believe that they have a right to do something, they believe that expressing that right is always right. That is always good. that it's always just, and that it's always going to be profitable to express the rights that I have. Whether that be in a lawful way with regards to the government, or whether that be in a spiritual way in regards to brothers and sisters. Now notice what Paul does here. He understands that there are differences between what these people think and what Paul is allowed to do, the freedom that Paul has. And he says, nevertheless, now watch what it says here. Nevertheless, we have made use of every single one of these rights. Is that what it says? No, that's not what the text says. It says, nevertheless, we have not made use of these rights, but we endure anything rather than put an obstacle in the way of the gospel of Christ. See, Paul knew that there were differences, but Paul was not about to express his rights in order to cause his brother or sister to stumble and thus put an obstacle in front of the gospel. And so what does that look like? Know what else he says? It says there, do you not know that those who are employed in the temple service get their food from the temple, and those who serve at the altar share in the sacrificial offering? In the same way, the Lord commanded that those who proclaim the gospel should get their living by the gospel. But I have made no use of any of these rights. Paul says, I could require monetary things from you, but I know that for you, that may be a stumbling block. I know for you that might be something that would cause some contention between you and I. I know that if I did that might be an area where your heart would be hardened on that issue. And so, what am I going to do? As Paul says, I am not going to make this difference a divisive issue. So therefore, I will forego that right, so that you and I can have peace, so that you and I can have unity. And so he says, down in verse 18, what then is my reward? Okay, well, if you're not going to get anything materially, Paul, then what is ultimately your reward? Paul says, what's my reward? He says, my reward is everything that is teased out, everything that is produced from the preaching of the gospel. That is reward enough for Paul. And he says that in my preaching I may present the gospel free of charge, so as not to make full use of my rights in the gospel. For though I am free from all, I've made myself a servant to all. See, here's the thing. When I value my rights over my service to others, the only thing that can be produced is self-gratification rather than God gratification. The only thing that can be produced when I focus on my rights is self-gratification rather than God gratification. So let's take an example. Let's survey some things this morning that maybe we have the right to do. And maybe some of these things might be something that we've drawn lines where we shouldn't draw lines. For instance, there are congregations that are just as sound, just as God-seeking as the congregation here at Gaston. Yet, they may not meet on Sunday night. And so ask yourself this question. Would we consider that individually sin? Or maybe they have Bible study on Tuesday night rather than Wednesday night. Or Thursday night rather than Wednesday night. Maybe they take the Lord's Supper at the end of the service rather than at the beginning. Or maybe they just place a basket in the back and let people, as they walk out, drop in their offering. Maybe they start services at 11 o'clock instead of 10 o'clock. Maybe they have shades over shutters. Maybe they've got red carpet over. And so the question we have to ask is, all right, what's the right there and where is the freedom there? Is the carpet a matter of salvation? Is the Lord's Supper time a matter of salvation? Is Sunday night, is 2 services on Sunday rather than 1 service on Sunday a fellowship issue? Or does it fall in the same line as meat sacrificed to idols? As Paul choosing to not take money as opposed to taking money? And see, here's what happens. Is that if Paul takes full advantage of his right to withdraw money from the Corinthians, he can divide that congregation. And I'm not saying this because this is something that's going to be enacted here. But we may have the right to only meet once on Sunday. We may have the right to meet on Tuesday rather than Wednesday. But what would that produce? If we sow that, what will be reaped, so to speak? Would it not potentially put a stumbling block in front of my brothers and sisters in Christ? I think it certainly might. And therefore, no matter how strong you feel about a certain right that you might have, it's up to me and you to sometimes say, you know what, I might have this right, but I'm not going to express this right for the sake of the soul of the person on the other end of that conversation. So that there might be peace and unity. And so Paul talks about that idea here amongst the brothers and sisters. And then he goes and he gets even more specific. Notice what he says in verse 19. Though I am free, this is the second time that he's used that word. Though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all. Question. The only way, or let me ask this question. How is it Paul's able to serve both Jew and Gentile when both are completely and totally different from each other? On a number of issues. Because Paul, where he's able to use his freedom, uses his freedom. And where Paul needs to suppress his right, he suppresses his right. I have made myself a servant to all that I might win more of them. To the Jew I became a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but rather the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. Mark that word, win. The reason that Paul uses his freedom where he can, and the reason that Paul suppresses some of his rights where he can, is so that he might win people. Let me ask you a question this morning. Are we individually and collectively more worried about getting personal wins or winning people? Because there's a difference in that. If it's got to be, whether this is in your marriage, this is in your relationships, whether this is in church function, if it's all about me winning, then guess what? I might win, but I might destroy a whole lot of people. I might destroy some very serious relationships. All over differences that don't matter. And so what does that look like? Well, maybe I come across somebody that doesn't dress like me, doesn't look like me, doesn't talk like me, doesn't view the world the way that I view the world. So what am I called to do? I am called to meet that person wherever I can find common ground without sacrificing my conscience. So for instance, let's say you know somebody and they are a non-believer. They don't believe that God exists. There are a whole plethora of them out there. And there's this big chasm known as the existence of God and the Christian worldview. There's two options here. I can say, because that person is so different, I'm not going to approach them at all. Or I can say, you know what? I bet that person values something called truth. And maybe I meet that person on that ground and say, you know what? I understand that you don't believe in God, and I happen to believe in God, but let me ask you a question. Do you believe in this thing called truth? Well, yes, I believe in this thing called truth. Well, let's meet there. Or what about people who don't believe the same thing you do with regards to doctrine? What are we called to do? Where we can meet them on common ground, we absolutely, positively should. Well, I know that you go to the Baptist church down the street, or you go to the Methodist church down the road, or you go to your Jehovah's Witness on the other side of town. Let me ask you something. I know that we see things differently, but where's their common ground? Oh, okay, you believe in God, and you believe in God. Well, let's have a conversation about that. Why? So that I might win some people. That I might gain a brother and sister in Christ. Notice what he says in verse 22. To the weak, I became weak, that I might win the weak. So who are the weak people that Paul's been talking about? The weak brother in Christ in this section is the one who believes that eating idol meat is a sin. And so he says, you know what I'm going to do when I encounter that weak brother? I'm not going to sit there and point the finger and make fun of them for the fact that they're spiritually weak and that they can't handle eating a slab of meat that was sacrificed to the idol that they bought in the marketplace. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just not going to eat meat. So that I might win that brother. So I might preserve the unity of the body so that we can move forward with the same heart, with the same soul, with the same mind, so that Jesus might be proclaimed, so that Jesus might win the day, rather than me winning a petty skirmish. To put another notch on the belt, to put another mark in the win column. And so Paul would go on to say in verse 22, I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. And notice the motivation of Paul in verse 23. And this is the 6th time Paul has used the word gospel. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings. Notice some of the phrases that are used here by Paul. That the driving force, the driving motivating factor is not so that Paul would be known as the greatest apostle to ever step foot on the face of the earth. Not that Paul would be the most popular person in Corinth, nor that Paul would win a polling station about, hey, who's the greatest teacher in the land? He says to do it all for the sake of the gospel. For it's not Paul that saves people, it's the gospel that saves people, that brings people into a relationship with Jesus Christ. And so Paul's not worried about the differences that he might have a right to. And notice, he does that for the sake of the gospel, that he might share with them. Paul doesn't go around and teach and preach the gospel so that he can go back and report to his boys, I saved 50 people today. And so that he can go back to his boys and his fellow companions and say, the Lord did work in a place that we were. And so he concludes with this. Do you not know that in a race all runners run, but only one receives the prize? And so he tells the Corinthian church, this church that is divided, this church that is jacked up, this church that has a number of issues, run so that you might obtain. And if we run with focus only on our rights and only on the things that might divide us from everybody else, there's a possibility that we could be disqualified. Because every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive perishable wreaths, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. Let me ask you a question as we close. Whether it comes to the relationships in your life, whether it comes to your marriage, whether it comes to the strangers or co-workers, or even your brothers and sisters in Christ, what do you have a tendency to focus on? Is it the differences? Is it your rights? Or are we willing to put those things aside that do not matter so that the gospel might receive acceptance and God might receive the glory? Because here's the thing. Even amongst Jesus' 12, even amongst the churches in Corinth, and even amongst the churches in the first century, there are a whole lot of differences. The differences don't equal division. And so this morning, maybe you're one of those people that's been focused a little bit too much on your rights and your differences in people around you and the differences of your brothers and sisters. And maybe that's something that's driven you to a place where, you know what, the only person that's going to heaven are you and your wife, and you're not sure about her. If that's the mentality and if that's the heart, there will be no success. Just isolation. So let's be a people who put aside the differences that don't matter so that we might produce in this county, in this state, and as we put our means to the world, that we might produce disciples of Jesus Christ. Let's meditate on these things this morning as we stand and as we sing.